able-bodied enough, because it's clear some of the warriors who are missing limbs, like Gabber, will fight and fight very well. If we assume that it's all men, which is, we know, not quite true, then we have about 400 warriors on the island, and thus a population of probably about 800 able-bodied adults. If we assume that Gabber is forging a weapon for everyone who could possibly wield one, then we probably have an adult population of more like 400. So 400 to 800 is our rough estimate for the island's population. And if half the population is supposed to be under 15, which is basically the age of our riders or younger, we would expect to see hundreds of them. Not this tiny little group plus a few other small children we see otherwise. There should be a lot more kids. We just don't see them. So, of course, this is due to budget and the fact that we're trying to focus the story on a few people, and just the constraints of both budget and writing really skew this population way out of where it should be for a real Viking village. Of course, as we've seen many times, this whole series has almost nothing to do with real Vikings, so maybe that's not a surprise. However, if we compare it to even the population distribution of Iceland in 2000, which is also on this Herstwick site, even there, about a quarter of the population is under 15. Let's pick a number in the middle. If we have, say, 600 adults, then we should have at least 200 people under the age of 15. And we just don't see that. That is what it is. There are lots of dramatic and external reasons for it. It's one of those things that probably we shouldn't think about too long, because it really cuts into the realism, especially if you try to stop and ask, well, wait a minute, how is this island going to keep populating itself if we only see maybe 20 children under the age of 15 throughout the whole place? Something very odd is going on here. The actual whole article is really interesting and somewhat grim, because Viking life was obviously a lot more brutal and a lot less pleasant than what is depicted on screen, of course. And that brings us to the word of the day, which unsurprisingly today is treacherous. It's a word that comes up many, many times because that's Alvin's epithet. He is Alvin the Treacherous. But what exactly does that mean? According to dictionary.com, it is an adjective characterized by faithlessness or readiness to betray trust, deceptive, untrustworthy, unreliable. The Oxford English Dictionary says characterized by treachery, and treachery in turn means deceit, cheating, perfidy, violation of faith, or betrayal of trust. So it seems that being treacherous means being faithless or betraying a trust. Alvin must have committed some great betrayal in the past.
Time to answer all your hiccupy questions.
What unanswered questions does this episode leave? And actually, the answer this time is quite a few. There are a number of unanswered questions, some of which we will find out the answers to later in the series, some we will not. One of the big ones is, what was the nature of Alvin's treachery? What got him cast out? And what got the other Vikings with him cast out? All Alvin says is that he earned the name treacherous. We don't have any clue why or what the nature of his treachery was. We also don't know if the men who were on the island with him, were they all cast out at once whenever Alvin committed his crimes, or is it, as some of the other video commenters suggest, that certain crimes are punishable by being outcasts, and so certain criminals are just shipped off to that island and Alvin takes them in? Really, we don't know why any of these men are there. And it does seem to be all men. I don't think we see any women on Outcast Island. Another related question is, how does Berk's reputation spread? How do the other islands in the area know that Berk has successfully been freed from the dragons? How do they develop this myth of the Dragon Conqueror? That's a question John and Tyler ask, and one speculation is we'll find out that Berk does trade with other islands later in the series, and so maybe trading ships noticed that, hey, there's not as much dragon damage, and we don't see any dragons on Berk anymore. As for the Dragon Conqueror, maybe somebody spilled the beans when talking to a trader. Maybe they just made it up, which would explain his unrealistic features. But we don't know. Another question that Fishlegs asks, and that the Critical Canucks actually put a chart up about, is what rhymes with empty? There are several websites where you can look up what words rhyme with each other. A quick search for empty turns up several words that rhyme with it: entry, aplenty, Bentley, cognoscenti, gentry, plenty, sentry, 20, assembly, disassembly, subassembly, and so on. there are lots of words that rhyme with empty. So Alvin either doesn't know any words that rhyme with empty, or he's lying, or he just doesn't care about poetry, which, when I stop and think about it, is probably the most likely. Another big unanswered question, and probably a significant continuity issue, has to do with the weapons. We know the army was blown up, so a lot of their weapons were destroyed. But we also know that the Vikings tend to keep weapons in their homes. So what about all of those? What about Astrid's axe? We don't see it at all, but it will appear later in the series. So either it was blown up in the armory, thus it makes no sense that it appears later in the series, or it wasn't, in which case it makes no sense she doesn't have it here. There's also all the axes and stuff we see in Mildew's house. That's the one thing about this episode, or really the previous episode, that never really made sense, which is that the Vikings would be short on weapons because of the armory fire, but it wouldn't have destroyed all of their weapons, because surely they would have had some with them in their houses or at other places. Also, when Alvin finds fish legs, he's out on his own, sitting on a cliff overlooking the ocean. When clearly the entire village has been called to an emergency meeting in the Great Hall, why is fish legs on his own? Did he just not get the invitation? Did he decide not to go, which would be very unlike him? Why is he out there on his own? We don't know, and we never really find out. A big question that applies not just to this episode, but to the whole franchise, that Ian and Rebecca from Geek Reviews raise is, what's going on with the accents? Stoic, Gobber, Alvin, and Hiccup. People who all grew up on the same island, the same small village, two of whom are members of the same family. Gobber is practically a member of the family. Yet all four of them have four different accents. Stoic has one kind of Scottish accent. Gobber has another. Hiccup has basically a Canadian/Midwestern American accent. And I say Canadian because Jay Baruchel, the actor, is actually Canadian. Alvin is given a sort of East London accent by Mark Hamill. How do all these characters who grew up next to each other have such different accents? It's a joke a lot of people have made online, but it really gets made even more pointed here by Alvin's entirely new accent being brought into the mix, despite the fact that all these people should really be speaking the same way. And that's never answered, that's never even addressed. It's just somehow the way it is.
Judging we shall go.
So overall, this was a really good episode. Good action, good story, introduces us to a new and pretty compelling, pretty funny villain. Very surprisingly, Mark Hamill enters the cast as a recurring character. It has some downsides, as we've talked about, most of them due to, I think, budgetary constraints. My very unscientific rating is going to be 5 out of 6 plasma blasts on this one.
Thank you for summing that up.
All right, that is it for today, and I really appreciate all of your patience in waiting for these new episodes, as I have to make time in my real life to do this, and I enjoy it very much. I really appreciate all of you listening. I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode, which will be Riders of Berk Episode 7, How to Pick Your Dragon. Our theme music is Celtic Warrior by Damiano Baldoni, downloaded from freemusicarchive.org. The background image of a dragon is courtesy of Warpaint Cobra at freedigitalphotos.net. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Smidvarg, and thanks for being part of the game.